Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We have two speakers today, one of whom is Jennifer Roberts. She's a professor in the geosciences at the University of Kansas. She has been a department chair and now currently serves as the vice provost for graduate studies. Our second speaker, who will be joining us shortly, is Professor Emeritus from Georgia Southern University, Dallas Rhodes. And he has also spent many years in the leadership positions at through NAGT's traveling workshop programs, where he's had opportunities to look and think about what's going on in the geosciences with relating to sort of program reform. So with that, I want to sort of pass the baton on to Jennifer to sort of get us talking a little bit about how you do program reform and how you assess kind of the changes that you make in your program. So thank you.
Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for coming today. I served as the associate chair for about 3 years before becoming the chairperson, and in that time, a couple of different things were going on institutionally. One was we were starting to do quite a bit of assessment on our programs, and that was an institutional effort. We also had a very big push to start transforming some of our undergraduate STEM courses into active learning environments. And so those two things kind of coalesced, and as the associate chair, I was in charge of pushing some of those things forward. And so the first thing that we did as a department was get together and think really critically about what our learning outcomes were for our primary degree, which is just a general geology Bachelor of Science. And rather than doing some backward design, which is what some of you may have done or want to do, we already had done some of our design of our curriculum without going that route, and we weren't really sure that our faculty had the stomach to go through another iteration of that. So rather, we kind of just got together and thought very critically about exactly, what learning outcomes we wanted our students to have, what competencies they should have at the end of the degree. And then we ask all of our professors, who were the primary instructors for the core courses, to kind of go through and rate or kind of mark where those learning outcomes happened, and in which classes, and then sort of at what level. Was it an introduction? Was it an intermediate level of competency that we are expecting the students to have, or more of a mastery? And so once we had been able to really map all of that out, and we used CIRC and all of the different materials and resources that are available on some of these tasks. So we use kind of that matrix approach that that is presented there as an example. We also tried to figure out what other sorts of skills they were getting in which classes. Were they doing poster presentations? Were they using different types of computer programming? Were they doing group projects, mapping, graphing, all of those sorts of things that weren't necessarily our geology knowledge, but we knew were going to be critical for the students to be successful after they graduated. So once we had that data, we were very fortunate that, as I said, we had started to work on this course transformation, and in so doing, we were all kind of in the middle of really thinking hard about what our students were doing in the classroom, what individual assignments and assessments in the classroom were telling us. So we were then able to be fairly granular about interrogating those learning outcomes in individual classes. And that then meshed very well with our institutional requirements for assessment, where we essentially just took one of our majors courses each year and did an assessment of learning outcomes for that class based on our desired learning outcomes. And I think if I have control here, I think I should be able to share. We then were able to put together for what ended up being our 6-year programmatic review that's required by the university through our Board of Regents. We were able then to really get kind of a nice matrix of the courses that we had assessed, the percentage of our majors that were meeting our learning outcomes effectively, in which classes. We were able to really get a very clear view of where we needed to put a little bit more effort, perhaps maybe where the places we had introduced engaged learning methods were working, and places maybe where they weren't, or you know, critical assignments that we thought were being giving us a good idea of what our students were learning, but in fact, they needed maybe some scaffolding to bring the students up to where we needed them to be. And so we weren't really measuring how much they knew. So it ended up being a really valuable exercise. And what we're doing now is some other degree mapping that helps us really figure out how to streamline our students and get them through the program as quickly as possible. We were fortunate to be part of an AAU STEM analytics group that gave us some extra support for looking at institutional data so that we could really think about not just from the learning outcome and assessment, but you know, are we losing all of our students between this class and this class? Are they leaving the major? Where are they going? You know, is there a certain, we have a pretty flexible pathway through our major in order to get as many people through, because we happen to be a program that people discover a little bit later. And so that piece, that data analytics piece, really helped us figure out where we capture our students, how best they progress through the different pathways that they can take. We found that actually it didn't matter, which was great because it meant that we could stay very flexible. So we had a couple different layers of assessment that I think were really valuable for us as a program, that have given us a lot of insight, not only into what our students know, but the different ways that we can broaden participation among the students in those classes. So that's kind of a 10-minute intro, but I'd be happy to answer questions or spark some discussion.
No, thank you very much. Pranoti, do you know if Dallas was able to connect back in?
I think he's working on it. So I think maybe we can sort of do a little bit of Q&A with Jennifer in the meantime.
That's great. So open the floor for anyone that has some specific questions for Jennifer. I'll take you know, the liberty here in helping moderate. So, you know, now that you're, I guess you're vice provost as well, you've had sort of different positions within the university. Has that changed? Have the different positions changed your view on evaluating what success is, or do you think that there's consistency as you move through the organization?
So from my personal point of view, you know, I served as the primary instructor for Geology 101 when we flipped the course and we completely just took it down to brass tacks and built it back up completely different. And that was really a very eye-opening experience for me. It changed the way I look at myself as an educator, more as a coach and less as the font of information. And so I think at that point really shifted my opinion about all the different ways you could get to the same end, how all the different ways that learning can happen for everybody to get to that same common goal. And I would say as I have moved through my different positions, I believe that even more. And I would say that there have been different iterations of leadership at this university that go back and forth between my previous view and my current view.
Oh, excellent. So I see Dallas. I see you've been able to join us. That's great. We're just going to do a quick Q&A here with Jennifer. Robert Thorson, you have your hand up. Feel free to unmute.
Yes, I unmuted. I'm sort of new to this. I was the one in my department that flipped intro geology, and I got the most bifurcated teaching ratings I've ever had. And the bottom third just thought I was terrible because I wasn't lecturing. And the upper third thought it was the best intro class they ever had because it was fully engaged. How would you, as a vice provost, deal with teaching evaluations of faculty that tried this sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question, because certainly when we started this several years ago, luckily it was through our Center for Teaching Excellence with a lot of buy-in from the provost and the dean. But I had the same situation, and it was terrifying going up for promotion. And so, at that point, what I did was work really hard to show the data that I had collected. So, for example, we were able to change the DFW rate for women and our underrepresented minority students closer to parity with their white male counterparts in a way that had not happened previously. So I could demonstrate that by changing the way we were teaching, even if the students found it uncomfortable, we were actually being effective. And so since that time, our Center for Teaching Excellence has really embraced some different ways of evaluating teaching that's a little, that integrates some of the student evaluations, but also does some other types of measures so that it's a little bit more holistic and a little less about what the students like versus what, it integrates what's effective as well. The other thing that we found, because we ended up having this really move a little bit more campus wide, was that the early adopters really got beat up. By the time we were a year or two in, the students were having multiple classes in that mode, and they were a little bit more open to it just being the way classes were taught, and explaining to them early on that this was why we were taking the approach and what the literature said about how effective it was really, I think helped a lot too. We sort of dove in, without doing any of that first time through, and it was ugly.
Great. So if there are no other burning questions, we're gonna have Dallas. I'll share that PDF that you just sent. Make this easier for you, and if you want to talk about it, and then we can open up the full conversation.
Okay, well, let me say that I was hired as the chair at Georgia Southern University with a specific charge to increase the number of majors particularly, but along the way to make sure that the department was more effective than it had been. It was more engaged. And there's a lot of material on this figure that I'm not even going to try to explain, but basically what it shows is from the fall of 1998, when both Pernodi and I guess Pernodi had been there for a year. Pernodi had already been there for a year, but I started the fall of 1998 when we had 23 majors. By the fall of 2004, we had 101. And so the line basically shows the increase in the number of majors within our department over that period of time. And we did a host of things to try to make this happen, but among the most important came about as a complete bit of serendipity. Someone, and I don't actually remember who told me this, but there was a geography department at Northwestern Missouri State University that had over 200 majors. And I found this nearly impossible to believe at first, but I started looking into it, and indeed this was true. So finally, I contacted one of the people at Northwest Missouri State, had a long conversation with him, and what I was told was that what they had begun doing, what had started the whole process, was opening up the possibility of geography as a career to people by making presentations in each of their intro class that introduced them to the employment opportunities that existed out there, and especially, of course, with GIS. And that program enlarged in a number of ways, and ultimately they had so many employers interested in their students that they could hold their own jobs fair within the Department of Geography on an annual basis. And they became so adept at this that he told me at one point that the dean had told him, I don't care if you have every student in the college as a geography major, you're not going to get any more staff. And so, I said, okay, well, if it can work there. I hired the fellow, brought him to Georgia Southern for a few days. He gave a sample of the kind of presentation he made that they use as a recruiting tool. And most of the faculty in the department, I think, saw him do that. And we decided that we could do something similar. And so a few weeks later, we did this for the very first time. And we signed 20 new geography majors within our geology and geography majors within a week's time. And so we started doing it very strategically, not long before students were going to register for the coming semester, especially in the fall, where we were most successful, and continued to do it for as long as I was there. And at one point, we reached our goal of 1%. That the 1% solution you see referenced here is the notion that any department worthy of survival should be able to have at least 1% of the students in the university as majors. And so that was our goal, was to reach the 1% number, which we did about a year and a half after this poster was created. I think, at least while I was there, we topped out at about 130 some majors in the combined geology and geography program. So that's all I really want to say about this. I'm glad to answer any questions.
So Dallas, you weren't there when I was introducing you, but I also made a reference to the NAGT's, traveling workshop program and your leadership associated with that. Can you tell us about some of the things you've learned from, being in that leadership position with that program, what you've seen at different departments, what worked, what didn't work, and program reviews and all the things that you were involved after you were department chair at Georgia Southern?
Certainly. I got started early on with a program that was centered at William and Mary. It was building strong geoscience departments funded by NSF. Among the people, I think the PIs on that grant were Randy Richardson at the University of Arizona, and Kathy Manduka at CERC, and Heather McDonald at William and Mary, and maybe somebody else that I'm forgetting, but those were the primary people. And it started off as a program to bring people from other colleges, universities to various places to have big meetings to talk about issues such as recruiting or revising the curriculum or, several other things. And the people came and they were very enthusiastic, and that's one of the first meetings I went to. And then they would go back to their department, the one or two of them were there, and try to convince their department that these were great ideas that they should try to emulate. And basically, they got very little buy-in and found it extremely difficult to promote change with this approach. So having seen this happen a number of times, the Building Strong Geoscience departments decided to switch modes and started sending out the traveling workshop programs, where we would have two people, facilitators, people who'd been involved in the program from early on and had plenty of experience with it. We actually devoted a large workshop to building the initial framework for the traveling workshop program, so that we had modules that dealt with helping your department become more valuable, assessment, curriculum revision, recruiting new students, life beyond the curriculum. I don't know, there were, part of the workforce issues, particularly being in the workforce from day one. And departments applied, at that point early on when it was still funded by NSF for support to have a workshop. If they were successful in their application, 2 people went and spent typically 2 days, although it could be as short as 1 and occasionally 1.5 days, addressing the particular issues that that department had described as fundamental to their well-being. And over the course of those 2 days, the most remarkable thing that happened was that people actually sat down and talked to each other in a concerted way that doesn't happen if you have a faculty meeting a month that lasts an hour, or even a few more meetings than that. I mean, to put people essentially in the same room for 2 solid days and talk about the fundamental issues facing the department always made a remarkable difference. We've done now well over 100 workshops at every kind of institution in the country. And in fact, we've had one workshop that was scheduled before COVID came in that would have sent a team to Ecuador. We've had a few other applications from outside the country. We've done, I think the first one we did was in Canada. That was a number of years ago. The program has shifted in focus as the issues have shifted, but always with the fundamental idea that what matters to a department is that they become valuable to their institution. Survival means being valuable. And I used to say it at virtually every workshop that quality isn't an issue. I mean, and that came as a shock to many people because they would say, what do you mean quality isn't an issue? If there's a question of quality, you're already dead. There's nothing we can do to help you, right? It all is all about providing whatever it is your institution construes as valuable and doing it in a way that's as helpful as possible. So if there's a single lesson out of the traveling workshop program, that's it. Figure out what your institution wants, needs, values, and do it really well.
Thanks, Dallas. I think I see a hand up.
Jim?
Jim, yeah.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I realized I needed to apologize sincerely because in my presentation a while back, I forgot to mention that we had an NAGT workshop in September of 2020 during the pandemic, and that was run by Catherine Ramaki and David Blockstein. And I believe that was the first online workshop that they ran, we were really concerned that how difficult it might be to do it online, but they did a fantastic job. We got a lot out of it. If they improved how they did that online afterwards, it was very good. But you know, I still think in person would be even better. So I'm a firm believer in those workshops. I think they're well worth it. And from that, we came out with 5 major goals and 5 teams, you know, subsets of the faculty to work on the past year. So we're able to get most people in the faculty to attend that, and everybody thought that it was very, very worthwhile. We had a lot of lively discussion, so we really, really appreciated that.
So I have a question for Jennifer. Thinking about what Dallas just said regarding, I'd say, the challenges of getting the faculty as a whole in a department, and you know, sort of embracing it. Are there things at, you know, now for you at the provost level, for instance, are there things at the institutional level, or maybe just a little bit up the food chain, that institutionally can help spur on a bit more cooperation when you have a department that's decided to, or a department leader who's decided to go down this kind of pathway?
Sure. So we actually had at KU they had decided institutionally to try something that had been done at a really large scale at the University of British Columbia, and that was providing postdoctoral scholars as coaches for transformation of courses. And so there were, I think, 3 of them that they funded, so probably about $200,000 that they funded, so per year for 3 years. And all of the science, this was mainly for STEM, the departments could apply for them, and we applied and got one. And so we had this kind of embedded expertise that helped us move through the process. And what we found, where, you know, they have, of course, had spent millions and millions at UBC, and I know I was at an AAU chairs meeting where Cornell had given each department like $1 million to do a similar thing. So you know, money is always an issue, and so relatively this was a small amount of money that then allowed us to write grants and find kind of some other resources in the university. We found that we really valued these people, and so we started creating more positions around you know, basically professors of practice who were there to help in some of these departments move that forward. And so that was something that we found to be transformational, and without it, I think we might have gotten there, but it would have taken a lot longer.
So I think I see Warner Cribb. I see your hand up.
Hi, everyone. This is Warner Cribb at Middle Tennessee State University. So we were a program that back after the Great Recession in 2008, 2009 was recommended by University Committee for Elimination. And at the time we had, I think, 60 to 70 majors. And so fortunately, the president of the university did not accept that recommendation, and we received resources to grow our program. And I think saw some numbers the other day, but we typically now run between 135 and 150 majors in the geosciences department, which is pretty good, I think, for a public regional in this part of the country. But getting back to, so we've had this growth, the program review and revision of curriculum was an important part of attracting students into the department. I think that was very successful. When I was department chair, in terms of assessment, to be honest with you, the biggest struggle I faced was dealing with differences in the different levels of outcomes that we had to assess. So we have a huge general ed program in this department. We probably teach pushing 2,000 students per semester, per year, academic year in our general ed program. So we have general ed learning outcomes that we have to assess and report on. And then we have course level outcomes that we have to assess. And then we have program level outcomes that we have to assess. And as chair, it was very difficult to get the faculty to understand the differences between the three. They typically would not pay a lot of attention to the general ed outcomes because it's general education, but that was very important to me because we're a discovery major, as pretty much geosciences is in every department. And so I always tried to get them to pay attention to those because, and Jennifer, you might appreciate this, I told them at some point an administrator is going to come to us and say, you know, what have you done in your general ed classes to try to recruit majors? So that was the difficult part for me. And what I do for my course and program level outcomes. So program level outcomes now, what we've had to do effectively is assign those assessments to the faculty who are teaching different major topics. So I teach mineralogy, petrology. I do that through assessment of field trip reports. So I run a field trip in mineralogy, a field trip in petrology. They have to submit field trip reports and they have to upload them to their e-portfolio, and that's what I use for assessment for both course and program outcome in mineralogy and petrology. But to me, that was the hard part, was the different levels of assessment and getting faculty to try to understand the differences. And I'm happy to share the outcomes that I assess in mineralogy and petrology. They're based upon my field trips with anybody who wants them, because not because I'm really proud of them, but because I'm always looking for someone to make them better. So if anybody's willing to look at them, I'm happy to share them.
So Dallas, I'll ask you a question while there are others who might be thinking of new ones. You know, you showed your poster or your diagram with you know, what happened with the result of the recruiting talks. Can you sort of talk a little bit about what kind of curricular changes were needed, you know, to also accompany the things that you were doing with recruiting and all the other things? So.
Right. Well, one of the biggest curricular changes we made early on was instituting a GIS program that provided a minor in GIS. It became a major recruiting tool for both geology and geography majors. Geography majors are already required to take a couple of GIS courses, but over a very short period of time, we were able to demonstrate that students with that minor in GIS were going to get a job, and it didn't matter whether they were a geology major or a geography major, and whether they were going to stay in South Georgia, they were going back to Atlanta or someplace else. Someone said long ago, and it's absolutely true, that the attraction of the major will not sustain the program. You've got to be able to demonstrate there's a job on the other end of that major. And it became an incredibly valuable tool to us, where as students in biology, for example, were often struggling to find something to do with their biology major that's going to keep them in the field. If you had the GIS in your toolkit, if you were a geology major, it gave you a foot in the door almost instantly. So that was a really big thing. We also began to make our courses more proactive, as almost everybody did. We used to joke, and one of the issues in South Georgia, and we used to joke about this, is how do you teach geology where there isn't any? And when you're on the coastal plain of South Georgia, we used to say the nearest rock's only 2 miles away, but unfortunately it's straight down. So you've got sand and you've got silt and you've got gravel sometimes, and that's pretty much it. And we started taking advantage of what we did have, though, which was taking the students to the coast. We were within 30 miles of the Georgia coastline. We could take them out to one of the barrier islands. We could take them inland a little ways and show them beach ridges. And we used even our own campus. I mean, geology is there at all levels. So in our environmental geology class in particular, we did these little short field trips where we would take them and show them problems with drainage on campus, or problems that had to do with building parking lots, and what happened to the erosional issues if you didn't, you know, do something to constrain the water. So we made additions like that. We did other things as simple as changing the names of our courses. Introduction to Physical Geography became Climate and the Landscape. You know, what did we do with physical geology? It became Introduction to the Earth. That was
yes,
it.
Correct. Yeah.
Historical geology became something else as well. You know, so little things like that can make a difference. The reputations of the courses, I think, were improved vastly by improving labs, getting away from standard lab exercises and writing our own. What else? I'm trying to think. We did a whole bunch of things. I mean,
yeah, we had our own internal lab manual. We had we did a lot of. One of the faculty members got a NSF grant, and there was a whole bunch of wells on campus, and we used the data from, you know, the students were able to collect their own data and analyze and, you know, make predictions about water quality and things like that. So those are some of the other things we added.
Yeah, and for our majors, you know, dealing with the issue of not having a lot to look around locally, we instituted a series of field trips which ended up going regional and national and ultimately international. We ultimately had a trip to Ecuador. I think a lot of these kids, wasn't just their first trip outside the United States, it was their first time on an airplane when we put them on the plane in Miami to go to Quito. So yeah, we really work with our majors in that regard as well. And I think we started really placing teaching high on the priority, so the faculty knew that the quality of their teaching made a huge difference. And you mentioned earlier about, you know, assessing teaching. The question came up. We used to emphasize strongly that, you know, you needed more than just student evaluations if you were going to get a fair evaluation of your teaching. So we had an internal assessment of teaching program within the department, which meant the two people who were not teaching that course would go in and set through at least 3 classes, not just one, but at least 3 classes, so that they got a taste of what the person was doing, and wrote up an external review. And then we used the University Center for Teaching and Learning to also provide external reviews. And those made a big difference too.
Jennifer, go ahead, ask a question.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't clear my hand. So when you were talking, Dallas, about the students needing jobs, I mean, that's absolutely what we need. And I'm wondering, because I'm in a department that has actually built alumni relationships, probably like James at UT Austin, you know, for many years, and invested a lot of time and effort to really understand where our students go, particularly our graduate students, but our undergrads as well. And we've then developed sort of some you know, ways into different jobs that maybe we wouldn't have if we hadn't kept connected with people. So I wanted to see if maybe you could comment on that, or, you know, what you see. Is there right now, as vice provost for grad studies, what we see in the academy, of course, is that the PhD is now shifting away from the academy, and we need to find humanist jobs, you know, someplace other than in teaching universities. So that's what I think about a lot. So I'm just sort of thinking about from the departmental level, like what sorts of things do you see as opportunities, or have you used in your unit?
Well, I think most departments, especially sizable ones, has some sort of an external evaluator program or external consulting group that helps them. And that makes a difference. I mean, we certainly tried to make sure that all of our students were introduced to as many ways to think about their future as possible. For example, we devoted at least one of our seminars each semester. We had a weekly seminar. At least one each semester was devoted to careers in one way or another. And it might be one of our alums who would happen to be in the area and who we could bring back. Or it might be a friend of a friend. I had a former student of mine from when I was in California who was working at the Savannah River site. And so we brought him in to talk about consulting geology, you know, working with nuclear waste. We had a former student who went to work as a geographer for a big bank, you know, because believe it or not, banks use GIS. I mean, everybody uses GIS. And so it wasn't as though he was, you know, with an engineering firm or something like that. No, this bank was looking to map their assets, to know the issues surrounding all the assets they were holding. So I think the more broadly we think about our field, what it has to offer, and the more we see of ranges of opportunities. I remember another fellow, this was at a GSA meeting, who worked as a risk consultant for one of these big international investment firms. And he had been trained as a geoscientist, but risk was something he understood well. And so, anyway, they're expanding the purview. It isn't just oil, and it isn't just minerals, and it isn't just consulting. There are lots and lots of opportunities out there. And Chris knows the newer numbers better than I do by far. But I remember him saying that something like years ago, something like half the people who earn degrees in geoscience end up doing something else, and that a lot of the people who end up doing things that are really geoscience aren't actually trained as geoscientists. So there's a lot of overlap and a lot of opportunities in truth.
Thank you. I absolutely agree. Our new CFO at the university is a geologist. So
Hear, hear. Oh, and let me say something else about, am I still on? Yeah. We brought a good friend from NSF down to give a presentation for anybody who knows what I'm talking about. And then we left, the faculty left the room and let her talk to these students. Now, this is rural South Georgia, I grant you that. Most of our students from Atlanta, but most of them, she started asking them about graduate school. And most of them didn't realize that there was financial support for going to graduate school. This was a revelation to them. I don't know how we never thought to ask those questions or to provide that information, but it certainly was a revelation to know that most of our students thought they couldn't afford to go to graduate school because they couldn't afford to take on more debt. And we certainly learned from that lesson very quickly.
There must be other questions. Rudy.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. So I'm at the University of Calgary, and I have a question for Jennifer, and then a more general one. So it sounds like from your brief summary that you've been very proactive in making your courses. You mentioned flipping courses or making them more student-centered, and that sounds really good. I'm sort of wondering if you look at the courses in the department now, how many of them, or is it just the core courses, how many of them are in fact, let's call them flipped or student-centered, right? And how many still have to go through this process, because it takes time and a lot of work. So that's one question. And the other question I had is that, and that was touched upon in the last couple of comments, is the job market certainly has changed for geoscientists, and drastically. And not only has it, if we look at the numbers from AGI, they just had them recently a couple of days ago. Since the end of 2019, employment was reduced by nearly 50%. So drastic changes. So that must have some implications on our program, right? And I mean, the way I see it, a really obvious one is, I've for years I've been teaching sedimentary petrology, and it's obvious to us why that's so important and stuff like that. And suddenly it clearly is much less important if we just think about what job opportunities it creates. And so there are those two things. One is, how many courses do you think are really let's call them converted? And then second, how do we modify our curriculum to sort of look at the current job market rather than what it has been traditionally?
Well, so I'll answer the first question. All of our 100 level courses are flipped in the sense that you mean them, and all of our major courses in the core curriculum have some component that is flipped. So there might be a lab, or there's some percentage of it. As we all know, teaching is a very personal enterprise, and so we have taken the approach of letting the early adopters adopt, share it with their peers, and leave that door open, and have those conversations, but certainly not make it something that's required, because it doesn't work for everyone. And so I would say, probably we're still around only 50%. And that's, that's not counting field courses, which I would say are just inherently, engaged experiences and those sorts of things. But our more traditional, classroom, or what were classroom courses. Now, I have no idea what the last year has brought. And so that is the big question of how people, when they were forced into that space of moving things online and thinking very differently about what the classroom and the learning experience would look like, where that has placed them and the way they're teaching and will be approaching teaching in the future.
Thank you.
I'll let Dallas tackle the other one. And I can certainly come back to that one too, if you'd like me to.
Would you please restate the question?
Well, I was just talking about that the career and job opportunities for geoscientists are clearly very drastically different now than even a couple of years ago. If we But let's just go back 5 years ago, and certainly we're different. And even though the oil and gas industry was already sort of slowing down noticeably, but clearly they have been a major employer for very many years. But we can't plan on that anymore. I mean, they're going to be around for a while, but
I think
we can't plan on that, and so that's a big chunk of employment right there that's gone, and so I'm just wondering, how do we, and I bet lots of departments are wondering, how do you modify your curriculum, your fundamental courses, or those that we consider fundamental, to adapt to something which is essentially unknown, and yeah.
Well, I think sedimentary petrology is an important part of the geoscience curriculum. And I think the answer is one that we struggled with a lot in the traveling workshop program. And that is always have a plan B. We have to be honest with our students and saying to them, we don't know what the employment opportunities in the future will be. What we do know is the ability to deal with data and solve problems and understand the big picture. We'll always find many different applications. And if a career in the geosciences and a career in the oil patch isn't what you're going to wind up with, then what else would interest you? Do you want to work, in a big city? Do you want to work in a small town? Do you want to work for a large industry? Do you want to start your own company? I mean, plan B has to be part of your thinking from relatively early on. And so when we did our modules on preparing for the job market from day one starts with starting plan B, and needs to be there all the way.
And all I would add to that is just finding ways for students to reflect on how their skills are translational. And I think Dallas said it best: solve problems, work with big data sets, understand heterogeneity and uncertainty, but have them start reflecting on, well, what does that mean? How do I apply that, and how can I apply it in kind of these different ways?
Yeah, in Dallas's response, I really liked actually the notion that he just brought in, that they need to think about it more broadly, and things that probably they haven't even spent a second on is where would they would like to live, or where would they would like to work, and that kind of stuff. That's clearly really important, and it should be part of the decision as to what they're learning. So it's great. Yeah.
My wife was a university president for 21 years, and I've had peeks at the president's handbook. They keep it pretty secret, and it's hard to get your hands on a copy even for a short time. But I've looked occasionally and found out a few things, and there's a lot of information there. I could talk at length about some of the things you realize from 21 years of spending time with the president, helping her, listening to her problems. But she and I used to talk about, what do we want out of a job? And we decided there were three things. I would love to live someplace where I really want to be, but that's not number one. I'd like to be paid enough money that I'm not embarrassed by my salary. That's something you have to consider at some level. But the single most important thing is, I want a job that I don't hate the minute I walk in the door in the morning. I want something that I enjoy doing, that I know that's making a difference for someone. And I could have been, I think for either one of us, that could have been a number of different kinds of jobs. I spent most of my career in academia, and so did she. But both of us had little stints of time doing other things. I worked for a mining company for a while. I worked for a petroleum company for a while. She was an editor for a number of years when she was in graduate school, editing documents being translated from Japanese into English for use in the hydrogeology community. I mean, she started off to be an English major, so she got real pleasure out of doing that. So, thinking, start your students thinking in those terms. Where do you want to live? How much money do you think you really need to be, comfortable? And most of all, what's going to make you happy? I hated the idea of walking into a job that you hated from the minute you got to the door. That was the worst thing I could imagine.
Thanks.
Yep.
Warner, I think you have your hand up.
Just real quickly, the report that Sharon Mosier's group just published on the future of undergraduate geoscience education, if you haven't seen it, it's well worth looking through and reading. And it will provide, and if you're not familiar with it, Pranoti and Chris can give you the link to it, I know, but it includes a lot of industry recommendations. And in reading it, those of you who teach kind of traditional geology courses like I do might be surprised at how the report singles out some of the concepts and the skills we teach as still being important to students looking for jobs across the geosciences. So it's worth the download and the read if you haven't done that, and it'll help you in program revisions also.
Yeah, we are familiar with that report. But it's a big report, you know, one has to work through it. Yeah.
So, Rick.
Hi, everyone. I'll second that about the report. It had some really interesting, maybe disconnects is too strong a word, between the academic community and the industry partners who participated in that. In particular, we're hearing from a lot of employers that they want, you know, strong habits of mind, flexibility, maybe familiarity with business practices, familiarity with you know, all sorts of communication skills that they want, and we're teaching, you know, fundamental theoretical geophysics, for example. And, you know, many employers understandably take the view that, you know, give us smart people who know enough of the basics and we will train them for exactly what we need. Whereas the traditional shoehorning of academic courses has been towards teaching to our strengths, which is subject depth and expertise. And so we're going through a curricular revision now at Colorado State, and we're trying to negotiate this path, and you know, it's a hard one because there are these two distinct communities that have very different strengths and focuses, and I don't think they've necessarily aligned very well. And for some of the recent comments here, I think maybe they're misaligning somewhat more in today's job market, particularly if you're teaching courses that might have the same title and description of ones that were taught 40 or more years ago. So anyway, it's just kind of a general comment on the lay of the land and something that we're grappling with at this point as we go through our own curricular revisions.
So I can just interject. I mean, I think building on this and some of the things that, you know, both in the development of the vision and change, looking at all the data that came in to develop that report, and then coupled with some of the things that we've seen at AGI and the workforce data, you know, one of the key things that we hope students start thinking is about being skillful. So, you know, the resilience for students as we see downturns in various industries has invariably been those that have been very skillful, have a lot of skills to provide, and have been able to identify to their employers. They, you know, a lot of folks, let's say they have programming or data skills or whatever, they can get it shifted in a company a lot of times because, you know, energy right now, I think it's a bit of a one-way street, but there are plenty of other things when it's cyclical. They know that it's coming back, and they want that. It's a lot of work to bring back in a science technical, you know, professional. So if they can lane shift people, and this was one of the big things that happened in the minerals industry, there was a lot of lane shifting going on, and that was sort of one of the key things is you know, looking at all those different skills is getting the students to actually understand and articulate. I don't have a geology degree. Yes, that's what I've been awarded, but I actually have this large portfolio of skills, and this is how I can present myself, and I know that I can learn and interject into whatever the developing system is. I think it changes the perception versus, geez, geology majors aren't getting jobs versus, oh, I've got all this. And I think as Dallas is pointing out, you know, found lots of those students were finding, you know, new opportunities. So, you know, skillfulness seems to be one of those sort of key underlying concepts that I think comes through somewhat in vision and change, but certainly something that we've seen has been effective for a lot of students.
Yeah, nicely stated, Chris. I think one way that we're grappling with this problem is we're really trying to free up well-advised elective options. So students have much more latitude to, for example, get a GIS major than they might have had before. And perhaps creating options within the department that are also advised to emphasize these points for skill resilience and broad employment opportunities.
So Chris, do you see any other questions coming in?
No, I think we can, it's about 1 hour. I know everyone is, you know, dead from Zoom calls and end up having meetings scheduled back to the minute. If there's any other last pressing questions, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll kick over to our wrap up here.
All right, so thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Dallas, for some wonderful conversations and some thought-provoking questions and suggestions that you've offered. So a recording of this will be available for those of you who want to share it with your colleagues. If you have other questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, please feel free to email them to me and I'll pass them on. And I think we have our next webinar is going to be on May 7th, and we're going to continue talking about the vision and change in the geosciences, but this time we're going to be focusing on a career preparation for students. So if you're interested in that, please do come back on May 7th. I know Chris will be sending out messages, and so will I. So thank you very much, and I guess happy Earth Day.